You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
Labor Notes put out a great article about some changes in the post office.
Yeah.
I know we've talked to the various postal workers here on the show. Please keep an eye on the post office because they are being sabotaged from the inside out.
Yep.
Which is really a perfect segue to talking about public schools later in the show. But, they have a corrupt and incompetent postmaster general.
Yep.
And his plan is to sabotage the Postal Service. They just came out with a 10-year plan, apparently. And it really is to transform it into a more corporate entity and to really help the competition.
Yeah.
So, they are promising slower delivery, increased cost, and reduced access to post offices. What a winning formula.
That's a heck of a public service.
Right. So, who wouldn't want to go participate in that kind of post office?
Well, that's the scam that they always run. It's never-ending scam for a lot of the conservatives to nominate and appoint these people to get into a public service arena to dismantle they will dismantle that service. They will cut as much labor out as they can. They will increase cost, and then they will turn around to the public 5 years later and say, look at how terrible this is. We need to do away with this. It's the same scam every time.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
So they put billionaire Betsy in charge of education.
Yeah.
To make it worse. They put oil polluters in charge of the EPA to make it worse.
Yeah.
So that's something that I want everybody to keep your eye on. The post office, our postal workers, brothers and sisters, are really going to need our support in the coming years just to hold on to what they have, much less actually make some gains for what they deserve.
Yep. And for anybody that talks about champions the military and big supporters of the military, the nation's largest employer of veterans is the Postal Service. There are more veterans in the Postal Service than in any other business in the nation. So we need to support these brothers and sisters that have transitioned out of the military and into a civilian job, and now they're looking at basically getting screwed over.
Right, and I think there's a lot of similarities between postal workers and education workers. It's two of the really last remaining public services we have. And the more I think about it, the more I see that public schools are pretty much the last threads of our very threadbare social safety net. Where else can you actually get some guaranteed childcare, guaranteed breakfast and lunch, get plugged into social workers, nurses, and other, essential services for families. And so the post office and public schools both have been under attack for quite some time and under sabotage for quite some time.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out for everyone that as we transition into talking about a Teacher Appreciation Week for the next 30 minutes, it's important for people that are listening to understand what the end game is for breaking down the public service of public schools. It is not to make them better. When you talk about privatization, what we're talking about is the exact same thing that's happened with healthcare since Nixon. You slowly privatize, and it don't happen overnight. It's like boiling the toad. Mm-hmm. You don't get hot overnight. But eventually, in about 20 years, you look around, and the only people that are getting health care right now are the wealthy, the middle working class. I don't say middle class, but those in that area. No one else has health care, and it's going to be the same thing with public schools. It will get to the point to where we've privatized so much, the only people that are going to be able to afford an education are the wealthy. And most of the working class that can't afford to send their children to a private school are going to be sitting there going, what do we do? And the same way that with the healthcare system, a lot of the working poor is sitting here today saying, what do we do? And everybody's saying, we don't do nothing for you. That's going to get to the point of the same way with education. And it's a ploy. It is a ploy
right.
to keep the rich to keep getting richer and to create this neoliberal concept of we're all equal across the world. They want to create the point to where we are starving so bad that we will work for the same wages that people in Yugoslavia or in Mexico or in China, the same ones that they demonize right now.
It's a race to the bottom.
Exactly.
It is a race to the bottom.
And by privatizing education, that creates that race. That speeds that up to the point to where poor working class kids aren't getting educated. If they are, it's so poorly, it'll be the absolutely bare minimum, of education system.
Well, and I think you made a great point about who the Postal Service employs, because both the post offices and the public education system are two of the only careers left that are open to ordinary folks to be able to access a pension and a union and halfway decent health care. So that's another reason why both of these institutions have been targeted, to bust those unions and to lower the standards in this race to the bottom for all working people across this country. So we're looking forward to talking a little bit more about teacher appreciation on the other side of the break, but I also wanted to mention our post office brothers and sisters and the struggles they're facing, because really we're all in it together. So stay tuned, talk about public education and more on the other side.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report.
Scores on the land. A population burned up, bled dry. The marginalized multiply. And unite to fight. You've raided the wheel. Now they're tearing you apart.
Welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your patience today dealing with me instead of Jacob Morrison, our fearless leader.
It's been wonderful.
So hopefully I've done the show justice today. I just appreciate the opportunity to try to learn from Jacob and David and the great work they've been doing building this show over the past year. So this past week was Teacher Appreciation Week, and that's, as I mentioned, dear to my heart. And it's really dear to the heart of all working class people because of the importance public education has for all of our communities. Really a community lives and dies on its public schools, as does the extent that we have any democracy in this country. It really starts with our public education system. And something, we talked about on the other side is this attack of privatization. And, privatization in the nutshell is converting public money into private hands. That's what it is. Here in Huntsville, Alabama, it has been ground zero for corporate education reform and privatization. And where often they start with the most vulnerable. No surprise there. That's sort of how it works in our capitalist system here. You target the weakest first, and our school support staff are often the first, folks that are targeted by this privatization. And we're talking about your cafeteria workers, security guards, custodians, even secretaries, receptionists, clerical workers, all of these folks without whom the schools do not operate. I mean, if you go into a school and you want to know what's going on, you probably need to talk to the head custodian and the secretary in the office. Because that's who's really making sure things are running smoothly. And we've seen here in Huntsville and across the country this trend of privatizing these employees. So they're using public tax dollars to contract with for-profit companies, these various vendors. And why they do that ostensibly is to save taxpayer money.
Well, their claim.
That's right. So that's what they claim, is they're going to save taxpayer money at the expense of those workers. So, the case study of Huntsville, Alabama is a good one because over the past decade or so, you saw this massive outsourcing of support workers. So now, instead of a custodian or a cafeteria worker working for a Huntsville City School District, where they may have actual health insurance and a retirement pension, they are working for these for-profit companies, temp services like Spur, which used to be called Appleton, Kelly Services, EBSCO, There's all sorts of them, local and outside of state, that come in, and they operate like a temp agency, and they contract with the school system. It's not a coincidence that often the people who are involved in these companies are some of the largest donors to school board elections. Yeah. And so these folks are just screwed because they have no job security. They have little to no benefits. They can't gain due process rights. They can't pay into the state pension system. And that is where often this privatization starts. And
you have to question. I mean, it don't take a rocket scientist to sit down and figure out, okay, we are paying the custodians, the cooks in the schools directly out of public funds, the tax dollars that we all pay. No, there's no one that's in between them. So the money that we're paying them is their money.
Right.
It don't take a rocket scientist to figure out when we privatize it, and now we're having to go through a third party agency, a middleman, and they're getting their cut. It don't take a rocket scientist to figure out that, guess what? We're not saving money. We're paying more. The difference is somebody, well, for example, with my ex-representative Ed Henry, that's on this radio station quite often, that was charged with
I forgot he was out of jail.
Yeah, I don't think he served any time, believe it or not. But the whole thing is they're always working to enrich their buddies, and that's exactly what this privatization scam is you create this business and we'll pay you and you'll get a cut, and you can employ them instead of us. And under the auspices, like you said, of saving taxpayer dollars, how does it save taxpayer dollars if we're paying somebody else to pay that person instead of us just paying that person? It's insane.
Right. So we're not saving taxpayer money, and we're screwing the workers in the process. And what you get is extremely high turnover.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep your school staffed. Who wants to sign up for that?
Yeah.
Especially when in some cases you can make more in the fast food industry or in retail than going to work for these temp services, and you don't have any future. You can't attain any sort of security or pension or health care. So it makes the schools harder to staff. It hurts the services provided to the students and the educators, which then irritates the people involved, the families, the stakeholders, which then gets them irritated at the public school system. So then these privatizers come around and say, well, see, we told you there was a problem in our school system.
Yep.
Give us more money, give us more contracts, and we'll fix it.
Yeah, well, and as anybody that's been in the labor movement for more than a year knows, this is the start, because what you'll see next is after they've privatized all of these individuals, you'll see them going towards the teachers or the teaching assistants, and they'll say, well, we need to make them, instead of employees of the school, they'll be independent contractors. Right. And they'll have to negotiate independently on their own, individually, and that will begin to fail, because it always begins to fail without a doubt. And just like we were talking about with the post office earlier, in 10, 15 years, they'll say, look, we told you this was a failing system. We created they're not going to say it,
right,
but we created the failing system so we could begin to outsource and privatize everything.
So then they can sell you the solution to the failure they created.
Exactly.
And right here in the 5th Congressional District, we have a gentleman named Casey Wardynski running for Congress. He was superintendent in Huntsville City Schools. He was really the privatizer in chief. He was quite the innovator in terms of ways to screw over his employees and ways to privatize public money. He was using public funds to hire a political consultant to help do PR work. He had public money going to a consulting agency to do HR work. In addition to these workers that were being outsourced, and he also intentionally created one of the highest teacher turnover rates in the state.
Yeah.
So people obviously express concern about high teacher turnover and difficulties in finding good teachers in schools, but some of these folks are doing this on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's and here's the thing, and you were an educator, still are an educator, maybe not actively employed in
right.
that, but you are an educator. You were professionally trained.
I'll always be an educator in my heart.
Exactly. So here's the point, because for the past 5 years we've had all the parents complaining about Common Core. We have a lot of discussion around the education system is failing us. You need only to look to your legislators. Do the educators in a public school system get to set what their materials are going to be? I mean,
right.
It is not the educator's fault. It's not the teacher's fault that your child may not be learning as quickly, because the legislator sets all of this.
Right. It's not the educator's fault that there's 15 too many kids in your child's class.
Yeah.
It's not the educator's fault that they don't have the special education aids that your child needs for their IEP. It's not the educator's fault that the building they're going to is falling apart and is covered in mold and asbestos.
Yep.
And these are the type of issues that our public education workers are facing, whether they're the nurses or the teachers, the librarians, the support staff. And you're right. The Alabama legislature plays a huge role in that. In the aftermath of the Great Recession, a little over a decade ago, Alabama had some of the steepest cuts to K-12 education in the nation. So, this week, as they brag about the new education budget that's been implemented, which, of course, it is better than last year, and which was better than the year before, and that's great. But really, all we're doing at this point is making up for lost ground, because now we have an entire cohort of students throughout their time in a K-12 education system who've been educated under austerity, under budget cuts, under corporate reform, under standardized testing. Because that is another way in which they make money off our schools.
Yeah.
They implement new tests, which with new tests comes new curriculum, new textbooks you have to purchase, new software you have to purchase. And of course, that collects your students' data. Yeah. They have to have their precious data. They don't give a crap about kids learning, but they really, really care about the data. They have to see good data. They want to have a report card for the school with the data on it. They want third-party vendors to have access to this data. So there are all kinds of ways in which private interests have found ways to make public education a commodity.
Yeah, probably.
And a source of profit.
Yeah. All of that to say, hug your teacher. Give them a gift card. Don't
violate the ethics law. God forbid you give them a gift card that is over $25.
I don't know. I don't know anything about the ethics law.
Just don't tell anybody what you gave them.
Don't tell anybody. Yeah, but I mean, it's coming. The school year's coming to a close. Teachers.
It's been a hell of a year for teachers and everybody in schools this year.
Teachers, nurses, workers in general have really dug in and saved this country this year through one of the worst healthcare crises that we've seen, certainly in my generation and in numerous generations. The teachers deserve much more than what they're getting right now.
Absolutely. They have really picked up the slack.
Workers.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right. It has been the teachers, the nurses, the fast food workers, the delivery drivers,
the grocery store workers.
All these folks that are quote unquote essential.
Yeah.
They're essential to keeping our economy going and really our whole society going. But they're not essential when it comes time to pay a living wage, or to give them a voice at the bargaining table, or to guarantee dignity in retirement and health care.
Yeah. And the one and this weekend, I guess we should point out, we're coming up on the end of this segment. We got one more, so y'all stick around. But as we're talking about essential workers, the one essential worker that gets left out more than anybody is mothers. And this Mother's Day weekend,
That's right.
Without the mothers out there, we wouldn't be what we are. So, a big shout out, happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, especially to my wife and my mom. My wife is religiously watching us every week. So, I love her to death and couldn't have been the person that I am without her. So happy Mother's Day to all you ladies out there, and to the single dads that may be taking care of your kids as well.
Absolutely.
They're just as much a mother as anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so happy Mother's Day to my mother, to my wife, to all those women out there and men who are taking up and serving as de facto parents and grandparents for kids. And, to tie it back into education, let's not forget that teaching is a very predominantly female workforce. And don't think that doesn't factor into why they are bullied like they are and why they are demeaned the way they are. There is some aspect there where they recognize it's mostly women doing this work, and it's dismissed that way.
Yeah, and they've always been the caretakers of our society. I mean, it all has the same tie-in. They're dedicated caretakers of our children and of society in general. They are what frame what we know as society right now.
Absolutely. So, this is the end of Teacher Appreciation Week, and I do really, truly want to extend our appreciation to not just teachers, but all folks working in our public schools, because you make such a difference in the lives of young people. And as I mentioned earlier, you're about one of the last vestiges left of a really broken social safety net in this country. Yeah. And you're helping keep kids fed. You're helping to keep them safe. And, without you guys, our communities really, really do struggle. So we want to thank you. We want to encourage you to get organized, talk with your coworkers, and start talking with those legislators and superintendents and school board members. Thanks for what you do. Keep fighting, stay strong, finish out the school year. We love you.
And the community rally around them. The community needs to rally around them.
Absolutely.
Folks, we got one more segment. We shall be back in just a second. Don't turn the dial. Don't turn off YouTube, Facebook, whatever you're watching on. Stick with us.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week, get our snide quips about the news of the day, then follow us on social media. Facebook.com/The Valley Labor Report, Twitter @Labor Reporters, @JacobM_AL, and @Radical Unionist. If you missed part of the show and you want to go back and watch it later, search on YouTube for the Valley Labor Report. Please subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments throughout the week. We also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps, so to see if we are on your listening platform of choice, go to thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. We do have a website where you can buy our hats and our stickers at thevalleylaborreport.org. And if you appreciate our work and you want to keep us on the air, please consider throwing us a couple bucks on our patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.